GM, we are back with our 18th and final Genius Call for 2022. We are so excited for what we have in store today. We have probably one of the best protocols out there in terms of identity and identity management that's at the leading edge of how Web3 is taking shape. We're excited to have Nader Dabit from the Lens protocol. He is the Director of Developer Relations at Lens and Aave. In this call, Nader is going to give us a Lens ecosystem overview. We're going to discuss the background and origin of the Lens protocol and how it was differentiated in the wider ecosystem. He's also going to cover some very practical use cases, as well as conduct some demos where necessary. And don't worry, for the podcast listeners, we're going to cover in-depth and word-by-word, blow-by-blow account of what's happening on the screens so that you can maximize this wherever you're listening to your podcast. And as I said, Nader is the Director of Developer Relations at Lens Protocol. Previously, he led the developer advocacy for front-end web and mobile at Amazon Web Services, and then the Graph Protocol. So with that, we're going to jump right into our 18th Genius Call. Nader, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. How's everything going?
Hey, very good, very good. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So I would love to start with the real deep origins of the Lens protocol itself, where it started and how it started. Can you provide us some background there?
Yeah, the original idea came from a discussion actually that was happening on Twitter about a year and a half ago, I would say. And I think Stanley had sent a tweet out that said basically, would anyone be interested or is it interesting if we would build out like a social protocol that would be built on essentially like Web3 blockchain primitives? And I completely just botched the exact wording of that tweet, but that was the general idea that came from that tweet. There was a lot of like positive reception there. And from that, original discussion, they actually started building Lens for about a year, I think, before it was actually released. And this was before I was part of the team as well. And after prototyping, thinking through the design decisions for how this would actually work, and spending a lot of time, thinking about how they would actually scale this and make this a real world product. They launched it officially on the Polygon network, on chain with a live implementation of this around 6 months ago or something like that. And that was when I started actually building on it. And from there, I'll kind of go into like how I joined the team, but I've been doing developer education for a while, and I had done a video around the time that they had launched the protocol, and that video had been really popular, I think, within the developer community. A lot of people actually that are building the production apps today on Lens got started, be introduced through that video, and I kind of like since then I've been just really excited about building on Lens. So kind of one thing led to another, and now I work with them full time.
I share a familiar story, and I can empathize with the just digging in and starting to do work. Gets both that practical expertise, but also that notoriety. That's fantastic. I do want to take one like half step back and really talk about, for folks that are listening and they're like, well, what's the difference between a platform and a protocol? And why do I need a protocol for social? Why can't I just keep using Facebook or Twitter or others? Can you share some light on the stance that Lens takes as a protocol?
Yeah, there's quite a bit to talk about here. But first of all, I would say that when you think of Facebook, when you think of Twitter, when you think of Instagram, these are actually fully controlled both on the front end and the back end by the teams and companies that build them. They have full control over the API access, meaning that if you wanted to build out your own version of Instagram, you wouldn't be able to kind of take advantage of their back end, their APIs, all of the things that they're using, because they're building it specifically for their individual client applications that they support and they maintain. When you think of a protocol, though, you kind of are thinking more about building out the backend infrastructure and making all these APIs and data and everything available permissionlessly to anyone that wants to build on top of it. And when you think about building in this way, you're kind of opening up the door to a lot of innovation and a lot of experimentation. Because if you're a developer and you're thinking about actually building out a competitor to some existing social media app, or you have an idea that you want to implement that's just slightly different, that you want to see if people might like, it's actually quite a heavy lift to compete in the social space. Because not only do you have to actually build out the client application, you have to obviously have to build out the back end and all of the things that go around content moderation and scalability and just everything that you would need to kind of make a just basic prototype be compelling for the average person to use. So when you have something like a protocol like Lens, all of that work has already been done for you. So on the front end, you as a mobile engineer or a web engineer, you can only have to focus on building out the client application, and you have all these building blocks, these primitives, and everything already kind of maintained for you, but also improving over time. Like, we're continuing to add new features, we're continuing to add or improve scalability, we're continuing to do all this stuff. So you have that back end already kind of built for you. And then maybe equally as important, you also have a built-in user base, because every application that's built on Lens has all that same user base built in. So when you can create a new social media application in the traditional world, you're kind of asking everyone to start from scratch. But when you're building on a protocol where it already has 100,000 or so built-in users, even though we're still in beta, we have over 100,000 users. You have 100,000 customers that are already there that would be like ready to try your thing out, and they have all of their followers. Their social graph is actually still intact, so they can kind of like take all those followers with them. So that's kind of the value proposition there. There's a lot more to it, I would say, but that's the gist of it.
We covered a lot of ground there in that statement. What's an example of a primitive? Like, what is a primitive feature that folks who are going to interact with a front end application going to kind of understand and manifest? And then I understand you also have a demonstration for us. Like, happy to jump into that if it helps explain what that primitive is as well.
Yeah, I think the presentation will kind of like hopefully clear up maybe some questions that people might have. But a primitive can be anything from an API to an actual, I would say, use case that has already been coded that you could just take advantage of and use. So one example of this is like we've implemented XMTP for direct messages through Lens protocol. And instead of having to build out this functionality from scratch, you can actually just leverage the private messages that we have and leave everything else like off. Like, you don't have to actually use everything that's part of the protocol. You can just say, oh, I want to have DMs built into my app, and I'm going to use Lens protocol's implementation of this. Or let's say that you want to have the ability to follow other users and kind of like, I don't know, interact with them in some way. You can kind of leave everything else off, and you can kind of just take advantage of that feature in your app, if it makes sense.
Fantastic. I think we should get to the presentation so that folks can watch and listen to some of those use cases that have been expertly developed to this point. And then we'll circle back with how people can get involved and how we can further preach the word of Lens to the world. So I'll leave it to you to take it away.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we will get going here. All right. So yeah, I'm going to do an intro to Lens, and then I'm going to actually build out an example mobile application as best I can during this short amount of time. So my name is Nader. I'm the head of developer relations or director at Avi and Lens. I've been in the developer education space for about 7 years. I've been an engineer for almost 11 years, focused mainly on software development for a little over 5 years, and then developer relations, which is kind of like a combination of software development and developer education for the last 4.5 or so years. And I've also founded a community called Developer DAO. Lens is what I'm going to be focused on today, and it's short like description or overview of what it is based on like what we kind of talk about as a composable and decentralized social graph. Now that might not mean a lot to someone because it's so concise. So I want to kind of dive into more what that looks like. So when we think of social graph applications, they all kind of follow a similar pattern. You have the ability to create a profile. You have the ability to follow other people. You have the ability to create your own content, view a feed of other people's content, and then often there's a component of a recommendation algorithm built in. And often what sets apart maybe some of the applications that gain mass adoption quickly is the quality of that recommendation algorithm. When we also think about, I would say, the majority of internet traffic that's going through HTTP around the world, you have 5 billion users, right, or so. And when you kind of like, if you kind of broke apart the applications that those people were using, you would actually come to the conclusion that the large majority, if not all of those people, have actually interacted with a social graph application, because these applications are very, very common in our day-to-day use of the internet. This is different than, I would say, most Web3 or blockchain applications that have a fairly limited scope of what the average user might be interested in, other than payments. I think payments are definitely something that makes sense to almost everyone in the world. But beyond that, like, I don't think NFTs, I don't think DAOs, I don't think DeFi, even for the average person, is that compelling or that interesting, you know? When we think of social graph applications that people use today, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even stuff like GitHub, even stuff like, I would say, to some extent, Stack Overflow, like have aspects or components of social graphs built within them. And again, almost any application that has those features I talked about earlier could be considered that. So with that being said, what is Lens and how does it fit into all this stuff? So Lens is, at the core, is a combination of a set of smart contracts that have been built and deployed to Polygon that are completely open source, that implement or they have an implementation of what a social graph protocol might look like. And then they also have built a developer experience focused API on top of Lens, on top of the Lens smart contracts. So for blockchain developers, the limitation often for building out the quality applications that we're used to in the traditional world has to do with the nature of smart contracts themselves and the limitations that come with them. So when we think of a application like Twitter, there are literally infinite ways to access the data that is stored in the databases powering Twitter. You can obviously sign in and view the feed of content. You can view your own followers, and you can do stuff like that. But there's also a million other things you can do. You can actually do all types of queries and searching, and you can say, give me all of the tweets that have been sent in the last hour, or give me all of the followers from this user. And there's just a million things that you can do. But in a smart contract, you're limited. You can't actually do any of that stuff. So what often people do to get around that is they find interesting ways to index that information and store it in the database somewhere, and then make it accessible to the user. So that's essentially what our GraphQL API does. We index all of the information that is being sent through the protocol in a database, and we make that accessible using a querying language called GraphQL. And what this essentially does is it gives people the same power that they would in a database query, but from a client-side application, which really is very powerful for people, for application developers, because you can build out a mobile or a web application and not have to build out any backend stuff. And you have all the power of a backend developer in this querying language. So in addition to this really high quality API layer, we've also added the ability to implement gasless transactions and also a dispatcher for signless transactions. Gasless transactions go a step further than the average kind of like user experience that you see in most blockchain applications, because most blockchain applications, they require the user to pay for transactions. But because of where we're getting at with these lower costs in modern blockchain networks that are kind of like less than 1 penny per transaction, we can kind of start treating blockchain architecture the same way that we do traditional software infrastructure. Because like when you think about Twitter or you think about Facebook or Instagram, every time that you like a tweet or you're doing something, you're actually incurring some type of server cost to that that application. But that server cost is so low that it's completely, I would say, abstracted away from the user, and it's subsidized by the platform. So the user doesn't obviously pay to like a tweet. The user doesn't pay to post to Instagram. Instagram subsidizes that. So what if we could kind of take that same approach to blockchain applications? It would require us to have a very low transaction cost. And that's kind of where we're getting at, not only with our current implementation, but especially in our future implementation of our backend. So this means that anyone in the world can actually create a profile and start using this application without needing to onboard through an exchange, buy the proper tokens, send the proper tokens to the right network, transfer those tokens to the right, to the right token or whatever. Like all of this stuff is actually a massive, massive barrier to entry to the average person that isn't crypto native. And by eliminating that, you're opening the door to like a massive, a larger number of people that would actually consider using an application like this. And then the last thing is this dispatcher. This basically means that instead of signing every single transaction, you can dispatch transactions through our API that will allow you to do certain things that are not high value interactions. So if you want to like or create a post or comment on something, you don't have to sign every transaction. Our dispatcher actually takes care of that for you, and you can have a higher quality user experience. So those are some of the things that I think set Lens apart from what you see out there. One of the core ideas around Lens is this idea of composability, and this is not only from the developer perspective, but also the user perspective. Because like if I build out a new application on top of Lens protocol and I release it to the world, then the average user like myself might log in and see, oh, this is a new app. It's something like YouTube. It's called LensTube, and it allows me to upload and view videos on Lens. But instead of having to kind of build out my audience and my following there, I immediately have all of the subscribers on day one that I do on all of the other applications on Lens. I've spent time building this network, and now it follows me around to every single application that comes online forever in the future. So this is, I think, really compelling to a lot of creators that are a little burnt out on building out their networks over and over and over on every single application that comes online. So let me go over some of the major concepts of Lens. The first and the main one is this idea of a profile. This is kind of the core component of a Lens interaction. When you sign up, you are given a profile, and this profile is like the main object on Lens, and everything that you do is then attached to this profile. A big difference between this and traditional, I would say, maybe implementations of blockchain architecture is that we often talk about, oh, you have ownership. You have this idea of like ownership in Web3 that you can kind of like own your data or own this or own that. But in reality, it's not true, because you can't take any of this stuff with you. You can't delete it or anything. It's just on chain, and it's immutable, and it can't be deleted. That basically means that it has different characteristics, but it's not true ownership, right? But with the implementations that we're starting to see people, I would say, approach that kind of try to solve these problems that haven't been solved in the past, we're actually getting around some of these limitations. And I think like the implementation that they've chosen for profiles does give you more ownership than the traditional implementation that I've seen in most blockchain applications. Because with this profile, because it's just an NFT, you can actually sell this. You can transfer it to a different address. If you change wallets, you can kind of move it around, or you can burn it. You can do. You have full control over, essentially like what you do with it. And this this profile has all the history of the posts, mirrors, comments, and other content that you generate. Profiles also have this idea of a profile follow module. And modules are something that are also implemented in a couple of different areas on Lens. And modules, they really allow the user to have a lot more control over the interactions that they are involved with, I would say, through the protocol. So for instance, anything that you could think of as a developer or in your mind, I would say, even if you're not a developer, that are using on-chain information can be programmatically built into this module. So a good example of this might be to say, if you're an artist, the only way that you can follow me is if you have collected one of my pieces of art, one of my NFTs or something like that. Or maybe you can say, in order to follow me, you have to pay $5 or 5-matic or something like that. Anything that you want to program into this follow module is fair game, and therefore people are having a lot more fun and a lot more control over how people can follow them. Publications are the way to actually create content. There are 3 main types of publications. There's posts, comments, and mirrors. Posts are original content. Comments are messages on posts or messages on comments. And then mirrors are something like a retweet or something like that. And all of this information is posted directly to a profile, a user's profile. And the cool thing about publications is that they can actually be collected and they can have their own module configuration set to them as well. And the moment that they're collected, they become minted as an NFT. So if someone wants to say, in order to collect this post, you have to pay $5 or something like that, you can do that. And we're seeing a lot of really cool stuff happen with this, because when we think of like traditional digital collectibles, it's like very, very out of reach for the average person in the world, because most of the stuff is like hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, maybe even $100,000 for stuff like the Bored Ape Yacht Club stuff. And for the average person, that's actually kind of dumb. Like, it doesn't make sense. But when you have mass number of people, when you have scale and volume, then you can actually make these types of collectibles more accessible. So a good example of this is that people are posting things that collecting anywhere between 10 cents to $2 or $5, but they're having like thousands of people collect often for a single post. And then that actually adds up to a large amount of money. So we've had someone, the most interesting example I think of this was someone that posted on Lens that they decided to quit their job and work full-time on a Lens client. And they set the collect to 2-matic, which is about $2 or less. And they've had like 10,000 people collect that. So just by posting that message on Lens, they made $20,000, and it took them 5 seconds probably to post that. Interesting stuff like that happens at scale when you have a large number of people and a low price. The collect module is what I just mentioned. It just allows people to mint their posts as NFTs that link to a publication's content URI, just like a traditional NFT, and you kind of have the ability to upload your content to either IPFS or Arweave, depending on the application's choice of backend storage mechanism that they are using. So next, I want to talk about the Lens API a little more. So I'm going to actually go to the Lens API docs and show you what that looks like. So I'm going to pull up the playground and then also the Lens docs. So like I mentioned, the Lens API is a GraphQL API. Whoops. The Lens GraphQL API starts being documented right here, and we have all of these different API methods that you can use. And one of the cool things about GraphQL is that you kind of have a self-documented API that you can use and play around with. And we're going to kind of look at how that works. But all of these API methods kind of give you different ways to explore the information within Lens. So you can say, I want to explore profiles or publications. I want to, find if someone follows someone, or the followers, or someone, the people someone is following. Like, all these are different API methods that you can just use in your app. And if we want to test one of these out, we can actually just click here, and we can see that all this stuff is really well documented for us here. And we can even copy the API method, and we can go here into the API Explorer at api.lens.dev, and we can just paste that in, and we can run, and we can get the information back. And what we've done here is, like, we've gone to the Lens documentation, we found an API query, we've copied to our clipboard, and then we've been able to paste it into this playground. And this is really, really powerful and really helpful for developers, because, like, as a developer, you're trying to build out user interfaces, and the user interfaces are just solely dependent on the data that you can kind of retrieve. So being able to visualize this data makes it easy for developers to understand the types of applications and the views that they can build within those applications. So yeah, Lens API is just pretty simple to use. It uses GraphQL. We're building out better abstractions even on top of this to make it to where you have even less code, because with GraphQL, it is quite a bit of code. So we're trying to make this to where you only need a couple of lines of code to work with. But for now, the Lens API using raw GraphQL is kind of the way to go. And next, I want to show how we can actually build out a mobile app using Lens. And to do that, I'm actually going to be using an open source project called React Native Lens UI Kit. And this project was just released last week by me. It looks like, yeah, last week, about 7 days ago. Original commit 2 weeks ago. But anyway, this project, React Native Lens UI Kit, kind of abstracts away the need to write a lot of code for application developers to quickly build out their mobile apps. And for instance, if you want to build out like let me take a step back, I guess. When you think about an application that you use on an everyday basis, you can kind of, as a developer, understand that a lot of these components are actually reused across many applications. Because like I mentioned, the social graph has a profile, a publication, or a post. It has a follower. It has different profiles that you can follow and things like that. So when we kind of componentize that, you could say, okay, let's create a profile component. Let's create a publication component. Let's create a, whatever individual component that would look like. And then instead of having to write all that code from scratch, you can just import it maybe from a library. And that's kind of what we've done here. And we're also going to be building out like a web version of this. But the general idea is here.
When Flutter.
Yes, Flutter. Maybe if someone wants Flutter, just drop in get that conversation started. I'm a big fan of Flutter as well. Anything cross-platform is great. Obviously, a fan of even native iOS, which is pretty nice these days. But yeah, our first library was React Native, and we're going to be doing web next. But I'm basically starting off here with a blank application for anyone listening that doesn't see this. On the left side of my screen, I have a mobile app that's blank. That's a brand new Expo app. And then on the right side of the screen, I have a Lens. It's actually not really Lens. It's just a blank application that's called Lens app. And the only thing that it has is text. And kind of what I want to show is how to use this UI kit. And the first thing that we're going to do is, like, when you open up Twitter, you kind of have two views that you can see. You can either see a feed of posts, or you can maybe see like a list of users that either you're following, or that you follow, or that you've searched for, something like that. So let's first create like a view to kind of get us started. That would be maybe a list of profiles. And we have like a really nice component called profiles that you can actually just import from Lens Protocol, React Native, Lens UI Kit. It's a long sentence. But what I want to do to get us started, I just want to drop in this profiles component. and this should get us started. And I'm going to go ahead and save that and see what happens here. So I've imported the profiles component from this UI kit, and now our app is updating. And we have, just with a single line of code, we have this nice view of profiles coming back. Now, this component is actually completely configurable because, like, by default, we're sending essentially a query to our API under the hood that says, give us the most followed profiles. But we are using React Native, and with React Native, it's built on top of React. And with React, you have this idea of props. And props are essentially just properties that you can pass in as arguments. So we can actually override this with different queries to kind of get exactly the information, exactly the profile data we want coming back. But by default, we give you some smart defaults that I think are a good way to get started. Now, beyond that, what we might want to do, and I'm sorry about the noise over here. I'm kind of at an outside restaurant because my office Wi-Fi is off. But anyway, so to get beyond that, what we want to do is to be able to kind of like navigate from one view to the other view. And therefore, to do that, we're going to need some navigation. So to do that, I'm going to kind of like build out maybe a couple more screens, and then I'm going to stop as far as the presentation is concerned. And we're going to kind of like go from here back to maybe a Q&A.
Yeah, and I can just jump in and give some voiceover here while you're typing away. So some of the things that Nader has really emphasized, and if you're following along just by the podcast or just listening from wherever you're listening, it's literally 25 lines, 25 lines of code that have been generating a pretty impressive view of everybody that's followed. Right now, Nader is pulling in another tab. And so on that tab, you'll be able to have who you are following. And on one tab, you'll have a list of folks to follow. The speed with which this is happening is pretty impressive. And I'm thankful that we're able to just watch the functions get put right up on the screen. I am excited for the preview of the web version of this. I think it's going to move things forward significantly. And then we'll get into some Q&A that I have some questions about just getting involved and where we're going to have the ability to really show folks where this documentation is. We touched on it earlier. It's docs.lens.xyz/docs. Very comprehensive set of documentation that we can go and look at and pull through. The library that Nader is pulling from right now is a library that's on GitHub, all out in the open. That is, and I'm just going to pull up the explicit one. It's github.com/lens-protocol and then /react-native-lens-UI-kit. We're going to put all these into the show notes as well so folks can easily find them. But it's been a really important view that it's impressive to watch Nader just on the fly here in a couple of seconds pull up what the base part of an app will look like and how we can generate from this UI kit, which is, again, in alpha, but still working pretty well and open for feedback. A really great way for us to quickly prototype a lot of things.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm just I just had to go ahead and factor to add navigation, because what we want to do is essentially add a new feature to this app that allows us to click on one of these profiles and take an action. So I've basically dropped in a navigator component here. I have this profiles component here. And what I want to do is add a on-click handler here. And here, we're basically saying when someone presses the profile, we want to navigate to a new component that gives us so we basically have this list of profiles. When someone clicks on the profile, we want to navigate to see the profile details of that user. So think of Twitter. You see a list of users, you click on that user and you see the user's details. So you see their posts, You see their bio, all that stuff. So that's kind of the view that we want to create. Again, these are very, very common components in almost every social media app. So therefore, I'm going to create a new file called viewprofile.js. And this component is going to be more code than what we've done before, but we don't need all that code. Let's start off with just about 11 lines of code. And this component with just these 11 lines of code will show all of that information. And this will kind of be a great next step for our app. And in order to make that work, I'm going to go here into the navigation, and I'm going to go ahead and import that new component. And this is going to be called view profile. Import that from the view profile. And then we're going to add one more screen here that allows us to view that profile. And then we've added, again, an on-press handler, like, when someone presses the profile, wants to navigate to that. So if everything is working properly, we should be able to click on Lens Protocol, and we have an error. So let's, I know where that error is coming from. Live coding is always interesting. Anyway, so we're going to try that again. We're going to click on Stanny, and now we see that when we click on Stanny, we actually see a feed of all of his posts, and we've literally written like probably 30 lines of code. And we have kind of like the core components of a social app. We have a lot of complex features like pagination, meaning like when you get to the bottom of the page, we fetch additional posts. We have the ability to click on handlers to handle actions like collecting and liking and hearting and commenting, all that stuff. Anyway, so this is kind of just, I'm going to stop here. I can actually keep going and build out a few more features, but this is more of just an introduction to kind of like let you see how you could use a library like this to get you started, and less of like us building out a full-fledged app.
Love it.
So
love the potential and love the possibilities here. For practical kind of overviews of Lens, the wallet that you connect and then claim your Lens profile in, for folks that our CPG, we're working hard to get some more folks onto Lens. We've been experimenting with it as a core team in the background. What are some of the things that folks can expect to see in their wallets that have the Lens protocol connected to it as a Polygon token and as things accumulate?
So what can people expect to be able to do with their profile, I guess you're saying?
Yeah, and how, like, they go check that wallet. We've heard in the past, like, there's a lot of Lens protocol IDs and profiles in it. Like, so what are some of the things that when you connect your wallet, what you can expect to be able to do and see?
Yeah, I mean, you'll immediately have access to the entire ecosystem of Lens applications, obviously, like right off the bat. And right now, I think there are around 100 or so that are like quote unquote live. I would probably argue that maybe 20 or so of those, or 30 or so, are quality enough that I would recommend people like taking it seriously. A lot of them will be that at some point. They'll be able to kind of be a little bit further along, with more work. But again, 6 months old so far, so pretty happy with where things are at now. You can view kind of a good overview of the ecosystem at lens.xyz, and you can actually also see the ability to kind of or see documentation that kind of gives you some guidelines to how you might participate in the ecosystem in different ways. So for instance, if you're a developer, you might want to build something on Lens, you might have a good idea, but you don't want to kind of like maybe build this in a silo. You can get connected with other developers, or you can even get a grant to kind of help fund some of that work through our grant program.
Amazing. So our Builders Club, which is what the Genius Calls are specifically here for, constantly bring together their ideas and what they're working on. It would be fantastic if we could have a way, again, we'll publish in the show notes, where folks can get involved in specifically finding other developers and also the grant program sounds like a really great asset and resource. For the grant program, I think like one of the things that we've seen with both the Polygon DAO and a couple of other folks that do them, what is the frequency with which folks can request grants? Is there a window? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly?
Yeah, we
Any
do a
details
monthly
there?
review. Yeah, we do a monthly review of grants, and they typically range in the ballpark of like $2,000 to $15,000 for the whole grant. And that money, let's say 15,000, would be kind of split across a couple of milestones. And then beyond that, we would probably want to kind of look at more of like an investment type of opportunity, either with us or maybe helping you get connected for larger grants than that. But yeah, that's kind of how it works now. You would be eligible from anywhere between $2,000 to $15,000 to get you started. We would also provide like marketing resources and developer resources, and as much support as we can offer. Obviously we're kind of a lean team, but we do what we can to provide all the developer support that we can around answering engineering types of questions and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. In terms of the next steps for Lens, what are some of the feature sets that are high priority, or some of the primitives that are high priority for you? And what gets you most excited about the next 6 months for Lens?
Yeah, I would say let's say the three main things that I think we're focused on are around scalability, accessibility, and I would say UX. So the first thing we need to tackle is scalability, because if the reason we're still in beta, well, there's a couple reasons we're still in beta, but one of the main reasons we're still in beta is that if we took the permissionless access off of the protocol, we would far extend what Polygon can handle at the moment. In fact, we're already often having a large portion of the Polygon blocks that are just purely, a lot of them are just Lens transactions, and we're in a closed beta. So we want to make sure that when we open the doors, we're actually able to handle that scale. And we've already built out something that is really, really interesting. You've probably seen Stanny mention it if you've been keeping up. Something that can scale up to 50,000 transactions per second. And I think that at that, if we can hit that number, then we're going to be more than good for a while. It'll take us a while to even need that much scalability. Because if you look at something like Twitter, I think Elon Musk tweeted out during the World Cup hype, the very top of the hype so far, they were processing something like 20,000 operations or maybe tweets per second. So beyond just tweets, you have to think about likes, retweets, all that other stuff. So they're probably closer to 50 to 100,000 transactions per second. But anyway, scalability is one. We're not only focused on that. We've actually, when I say we, the engineering team, it's actually already kind of prototyped and built out a proof of concept that works well, and now we're testing it before we put it into production. So once it's in production, we can then move to opening the door to permissionless access. And that will mean anyone in the world can just sign up for Lens like they can for Twitter and have an account and start posting. And I think at that point, a lot of the applications that are being built today and that have been built will just get a new onboarding of a ton of new users, and it will be kind of hopefully a really great time to be a developer or to be running an app within Lens. Some of the stuff that I'm most excited about beyond that are some things that we're doing around wallet user experience, wallet UX, that will kind of hopefully remove that final layer of friction for the average user around the world to use something like this. Because as crypto native people, we're kind of used to dealing with seed phrases and private keys and stuff like that. But for the average person, this is actually a huge friction point. So we need to find ways to abstract that stuff, and we're working on our own way of doing that. And then finally, monetization for the developers. We have something that will be really, really interesting, I think, that isn't a token. It's just a way for someone to make money as a developer by building out their client application on top of Lens through the platform. And that will be something that will be released in the first quarter of next year as well.
Very exciting. Circling to the wallet perspective, just as a follow-on question, does that mean that Lens will provide a method of instantiating non-custodial wallets, or is it more of just abstracting the onboarding and delaying it for folks who at some point will need to take custody of a wallet?
Yeah, it's something that I'm not able to really speak to because of the nature of the privacy that is kind of built around that project, because it's actually something that was very private before I even joined, and it's kind of like uh, the general idea though, yeah, is around kind of like combination of what you just said, but I can't really go into any of the details. I would just say I think it's one of the better approaches around lowering the barrier to entry for the average person to be able to kind of get started with a quote unquote like blockchain wallet. But I think that we should also go beyond that and think, what about the word wallet itself is actually not maybe the right word, I think, for most people, because like for something like Lens, I don't know, a profile might make a lot more sense, right? So just rethinking a lot of the things that we're kind of used to thinking maybe right now would be the approach that I think we're taking.
It does bring up an interesting concept of, is your wallet your profile? Is your profile your wallet? And I think that's probably along the lines of the thought process you're going through. And we've had interesting internal debates about how do you put forward your expertise and or your job experience in Web3. And a lot of times it's your wallet. And so they're sort of synonymous with who you are in the Web3 space, is very much your 0x profile. I really appreciate the time that you've put forward here today. One last query that I will put forward to you is, for the builders in this space that are slugging away on Web3, what is the piece of advice that you have for them in terms of the next 6 months and how we're operating through what's pretty much a bear market at this point in time?
Yeah, definitely a bear market. I mean, I'm kind of relatively new to this as well. I mean, I've been in this space for only a little under 2 years. I've worked with people that have been working on this stuff since like 2016, so I feel like a noob compared to them. But I mean, my advice is that, you know, if you still believe in this stuff, then try to find interesting things to work on that provide like a true benefit to the average person around the world. I think a lot of the mistakes that people make is that they build for the, the few thousand people that are very, very hardcore, like crypto native people. And you're kind of not really doing anything, in my opinion, when you're doing that, because you're just building for this small group of people. Instead, we need to build for everyone in the world. And in order to do that, you need to provide something that is valuable to them. And like, you have to rethink about maybe some of the assumptions that you have right now, because you know as a software engineer that's worked at AWS and all these other places for 8 years before coming to crypto for the last 2 years, we never worried about, oh, I'm building this on this type of database, or I'm building with this type of API. Like, it was all about the value proposition of the application that you're building. Is it going to benefit the average person? Is it better? Is it 10 times better than maybe what they already have? And if you kind of think about it in that way, there are really a few like gems that you can kind of like maybe find that are enabled through blockchain technology that are not enabled in any other way, and then stay away from all the other stuff. That's just kind of my opinion.
Thank you. Very prescient words for what is a really relatively nascent field, and fun and on the cutting edge of what we hope the future is. I definitely agree that you need to build for the masses and you need to have utility that comes along with it. We've been saying it for a long time. Now is the time to do it. And I think the next 6 months, the next year and a half are going to really separate out the folks that are able to do that from the folks that aren't. It's not to say that the Web3 maxis aren't important, but for sure, scale is an important lever for adoption. Well, Nader, thank you so much for joining us. For all the folks that are following along, hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. We will be back in the new year with another Genius Call for the 2023 season. I can't believe it's the middle of December. Thanks, everyone, especially to Chad and Janet and all the mods who help us make CPG what it is on a daily basis. Find us again at Crypto Podcast Goods, and we look forward to catching up with you in the new year and in the chats. Thanks, everybody.